Hello and welcome to another episode of What Happened, where I am dispensing with the usual intro due to the remote control device in the back of my skull that will go off if I take too long. Thanks, Waller. So do let me get straight to it. Warner Bros. Games and Rocksteady Studios' latest effort is a title that, from the time of its announcement to its eventual release, wasn't exactly desired by a hefty chunk of Batman fans, with one of the main reasons being, it's not a Batman game. But for a multitude of reasons that we'll be getting into, WB went forward with The Squad anyhow. In fact, they tried several times to go forward with the idea of a violent cooperative supervillain team game over the course of 14 years. And nothing, not the pleas of fans, nor multiple delays, snags, problems, and sudden departures was ever going to change that. So grab your mallets, boomerangs, various laser-firing artillery, and tons of Battle Pass exclusive gear as I answer the question, what happened to Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League? I can tell you this for free, there's a lot of backstory to this one, like an obscene amount of backstory, so let's just dive bomb right into it. After Rocksteady's Arkham Knight released back in 2015, which psychic damage was almost a decade ago, fans started to wonder what was taking so long for the highly respected London-based studio to announce their next big project. Some of you out there, however, may remember they were busy for another year or so developing the unmemorable Batman Arkham VR. This is important to our story because it meant that WB's plans to push the Suicide Squad had to fall to someone else, at least at that time. That someone else would be WB Games Montreal, who are best known as the developers of the red-headed stepchild of the Arkhamverse, Arkham Origins. It's literally in its name. To this day, I don't know why this prequel is intentionally ignored and never included in remasters or re-releases, but yeah, it is what it is, I guess. Anyway, once WB Montreal completed Origins and its DLC, their main staff moved on to their next unannounced project, which then caused, outside of some support work for other WB-owned studios, a huge gap in their work history. This unannounced project was in fact a Suicide Squad game, which, while was never made official, has had enough evidence linked to it over the years to safely confirm. There was, of course, Warner Bros.' push to start developing a film to hopefully make this team of unbalanced ne'er-do-wells a household name. Then there was the fact that both Arkham Origins and its companion game, Blackgate, implied that the Squad were going to be throwing their, kooky, deranged hats into the video game ring, although these hints would feature some characters that wouldn't actually appear in the released product, or at least not yet, maybe, I don't know. But honestly, before all that, I mean, that's not even where all this technically begins, because even though WB Montreal started working on Suicide Squad in earnest in late 2013, maybe early 2014, to coincide with the in-development movie, the origins of the game start all the way back to 2010. Yeah, you heard that right. Former DC Entertainment Chief Creative Officer Geoff Johns said in a San Diego Comic-Con panel that a hardcore violent Suicide Squad video game was in development, but provided no details other than that. Now, WB Montreal was only just founded in 2010, so it might be that the project actually started up at a completely different studio, or it had just kicked off pre-production in Montreal by a much smaller team, while the majority of the workforce focused on Arkham Origins. If I was a betting skeleton man, I think it's more likely the latter, because Mr. Johns dropped more hints that such a game was still in development in 2012, which moves it closer to when WB Montreal would be available, but we can't be absolutely sure. I did reach out to two former staff members who were at the studio during that relevant time period, but their only comment was sadly, no comment, and get used to that, by the way. And really, despite the facts that we do have, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a third studio in the mix at some point. I mean, hell, even in 2024, we just found out that Monolith had been working on an open-world Nolanverse game that featured the first implementation of their Nemesis system. So yeah, crazier shit has happened, and crazier shit will indeed continue. What we do know for sure is that WB Montreal's main team moved on to Suicide Squad, but like most AAA studios, they also had another smaller team doing pre-production on their next project, that being a Batman title starring Damian Wayne in a crumbling dystopian Gotham City, which we'll get to in a bit. It's now roughly 2016, and David Ayer's cinematic adaptation of the Suicide Squad released to a very divisive, i.e. negative, critical backlash due to a multiverse of reasons that it actually might need its own What Happened story someday. Although I really don't want to. Anyway, once the fallout from the film started leveling off, reports began popping up that WB tongue cluckers and beard strokers had decided to detonate the bomb that was lodged deep within their Montreal studio, unaliving their would-be team of villains. Now, this cancellation might have had something to do with the primarily negative reception to the film or any number of other outside factors, but the only confirmed one was what various outlets reported on, which was that WB execs were not impressed with what the Montreal team had produced, and apparently that was enough to axe the whole thing. This is where we finally make the connection back to Rocksteady, as the Suicide Squad concept was then shifted over to them, which we'll get to in a second, I swear, but I'd be remiss if I didn't at least finish up with WB Montreal. With their main in-development project now snatched away, they then shifted to their secondary one, the aforementioned Damian Wayne concept, which was known under the temp working title of Project Sabbath. Somewhat ironically, it was reported, along with a whole bunch of other stuff, that it was going to use the Nemesis system that Monolith had repurposed from their canceled Batman game and into Shadow of Mordor. Yo, big ups to my boy Garl the Drunk, I love you baby. It was in 2019, however, that this information, along with the general plot, cast of characters, and a significant amount of concept art, mysteriously leaked onto the internet, but by the time it had, Sabbath was already long dead. It seems sometime between 2016 and 2018, Damian Wayne's cape and cowl were ripped away, and perhaps incorporating the co-op/multiplayer work they had started with Suicide Squad, Sabbath turned into what we know today as Gotham Knights. It's very common for studios to not just throw away good designs and code, and instead find ways to repurpose them for other projects, and that's really likely what happened here, although I can't 100% confirm it. Again, the former staff members I reached out to remain tight-lipped on this, but if you look at the timeline, well, it really works out, especially when you consider when Gotham Knights was publicly revealed. Related to this, earlier this year, the legendary Josh Keaton said in a live stream he had done several recording sessions as Damian Wayne, which shows just how far along the game really was. He also revealed it was not an Arkhamverse title, and theorized that the reason the entire project fell apart and was cancelled was because of the leaks. Now, no disrespect to the man, but that doesn't really make sense logistically, because the leaks only happened in 2019, and Gotham Knights was unveiled in 2020, so the cancellation, or perhaps the transition into a very different open-world co-op game, had to have happened well before that. It also doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint, because why would a publisher just cancel a game because some details of it got leaked? Like, games leak out all the time. Anyway, during all of this, Rocksteady had their own shit going on. According to reports, they were working on a multiplayer project that may or may not have been a completely new, all-original IP. The other thing they were working on, according to the internet at large, was the fabled Superman game. The last son of Krypton has had one of the worst streaks of stinkers in video game history, as pretty much every solo game he's ever had isn't really worth having. And yeah, I know this sucks to say, but I'm counting Death and Returns in there too. It's just disappointing, you know? Just really repetitive, drawn out, kind of boring, and the mechanic... Anyway, the rumors of Rocksteady working on a game starring the Man of Steel wouldn't seem to die, even though they were just that, rumors. According to a Bloomberg report from earlier this year, Rocksteady basically confirmed a Soups game was never worked on or ever even pitched. So as far as I can tell, this was just a lot of wishful whispers. Moving on, their mysterious multiplayer project seemed to go nowhere, or perhaps again the work done on it might have been adapted to support the Suicide Squad, but I couldn't find confirmation on that either. Remember the no comment I got from the WB Montreal employees? Well, that goes doubly so with most of the former Rocksteadiers I also contacted. As you can imagine, since Kill the Justice League is just a few months old, and WB being a pretty litigious and, let's be honest, miserly company, I didn't expect many people willing to dish out industry secrets. There was, however, one anonymous source I spoke to that did give me a shred of insight into Suicide Squad once it had shifted over to Rocksteady. They revealed that the game's development was put on pause while story rewrites were happening in the background, which of course would have slowed things down across several disciplines. While they weren't able to provide details on what these story changes were, considering all we've learned so far, it could have been literally anything. If I was to hazard a guess though, it may have been due to complications surrounding the next Suicide Squad film, which went through several writers and directors all throughout 2016 to late 2018. Which in turn kept pushing back the release date and could have possibly affected other Suicide Squad projects. My source also cited two other things that may have accounted for the multiple delays: high employee turnover and getting acclimated to the games-as-a-service development pipeline. My source wanted it to be noted that this high turnover was not due to dissatisfaction within Rocksteady, but rather the AAA game dev environment in London, which they described as very competitive. Senior employees were often getting headhunted and offered way more money to join other studios, and while a number of them would take up these deals, they would either get dissatisfied with these new positions or suddenly be laid off and return to Rocksteady once again. Related to that, Rocksteady upper management also had to hire a consultant with expertise in games-as-a-service development to evangelize the team and get them educated on everything an online action co-op RPG had to offer, as at the time that's where the industry looked like it was heading. The only other thing I can confidently put forward, though, is that developing Suicide Squad was undoubtedly a technical nightmare, as Rocksteady, talented as they may be, hadn't really tackled anything with the level of scope and complexity that many modern online games tend to offer. When they started working on the Arkham trilogy, they ramped up their development and ambition in smooth and logical ways. Tightly designed, interconnected biomes with clever and detailed level designs, expanding out into an open world that was conservative in scope while still offering plenty to do and explore, and finally adapting that city to support a large vehicle for players to traverse the map, while turning the graphical fidelity up to 12. So going from that to having to design the very architecturally different Metropolis and gameplay loop that has to work with 4 players killing dozens of enemies online across multiple platforms, as well as stuffing as many different modifiers, stats, weapons, gear, microtransactions, and DLC as the cackling corpse-like WB corporate fat cats wanted, well, I'm sure it was a very stressful few years. And unfortunately, all that effort and stress would all be for naught. When Rocksteady finally did announce Kill the Justice League at the August 2020 edition of WB's short-lived DC Fandome event, there was of course much grumbling from fans. It had been 6 years since there had been a traditional single-player Batman game, and after the Fandome event, it seemed like WB and its associated studios were making anything but that. This is because they didn't announce one, but two titles that put a heavy focus on co-op multiplayer that were all about stats, loot, season passes, and not controlling Batman. Now, I know what some of you are going to say. Why on earth would they greenlight two of these things when the Square Enix and Crystal Dynamics live service Avengers game flopped so horribly? Well, time makes fools of us all, because that wasn't even out yet. The Fandome event was held in August, while Avengers failed to assemble the following October. But what about much later, like when the Avengers player count started to suddenly dip? Well, when you're knee-deep in AAA development and millions upon millions of dollars and years upon years of work are at stake, when something gets publicly announced, in 99% of cases, it's far too late to pivot or backpedal. The following has been said lots of times, and I'm gonna say it again, but when something becomes hot like Fortnite or Destiny, lots of publishers start rubbing their hands together going, oh, this is the new hot shit, let's do that. But given the prolonged nature of video game development, by the time they actually release their version of that popular thing, it's far, far too late, and they often end up failing in spectacular and embarrassing ways. Suicide Squad did have one saving grace during its first big reveal though, and that was the fact that its first trailer was all CGI and bereft of any real gameplay, so for a sizable chunk of fans, the benefit of the doubt was being given. Sure, this clearly wasn't the shiny next-gen Batman sequel from a series that had sold over 30 million units worldwide, but, well, it was still Rocksteady, and they had a proven track record. However, that same track record would be tarnished that same month, when a report began to circulate that, back in 2018, 10 of Rocksteady's 16 female employees signed a letter of complaint to the studio heads, citing a toxic work environment that fostered sexual harassment, demeaning comments, and various other forms of abuse. This scathing report would go on to reveal that Rocksteady did very little to reprimand or correct the behavior aside from a single one-hour seminar on proper workplace etiquette. Once this story broke out, Rocksteady management did confirm that the 2018 letter of complaint had been filed, but contrary to the new report, said they did take extensive measures to fix these issues. One female employee wound up quitting the company altogether and asked for Rocksteady management to remove her name from the credits of Suicide Squad, as she no longer wanted to be associated with the studio. Clearly, though, things were not running all that smoothly, and this controversy wasn't going to be the only one, as it then seemed to set off a chain reaction of negative headlines, massive delays, fan backlash, and two high-profile and very sudden exits. During the Fandome event, Suicide Squad was given a loose 2022 launch window, but come March of 2022, they still hadn't narrowed that down. Unfortunately, when Rocksteady did share news about the release date, they admitted it was going to shift. By a lot, namely skipping the entire year altogether and moving into another nebulous early 2023. The reason given, of course, was the usual, want to deliver the best quality project, thank you for your patience, yada yada yada. And don't get me wrong, that's a good thing. I mean, I shudder to think of the product that would have been released if WB had insisted on a 2022 launch. That wasn't, however, going to be the only delay. Far from it. Just a few months later at the 2022 Please Wrap It Up Awards, this early 2023 date then shifted slightly again to mid-2023, May 26 to be precise. It would also include the special mention that it would be Kevin Conroy's last time portraying Batman, as he sadly passed away the month earlier. RIP to a legend. The bad shit, though, really hit the fan during the February 2023 State of Play event, where an extended gameplay sequence was shown of the Suicide Squad bouncing around Metropolis, talking incessantly and shooting guns and lasers at brightly colored things. During this long presentation and the subsequent FAQ that was posted online afterwards, Rocksteady confirmed the fears of many fans. Suicide Squad would need a constant internet connection to play, would have an elaborate battle pass, and would consistently offer new downloadable gear, weapons, costumes, and characters on top of that, much like, you guessed it, the Avengers game. Funnily enough, around the time this state of play aired online, it was announced that Avengers would no longer be receiving any new content or characters, as Crystal Dynamics was now moving on to other projects. Yeah, not at all a red flag, is it, WB? The response to this new gameplay trailer and all that horrible stuff I mentioned didn't go down well, and was met with plenty of vitriol from many fans who just wanted a good narrative-based single-player superhero game, something that, outside of a few key examples, seemed to be getting rarer and rarer. Now, at the time this trailer aired, Kill the Justice League was still slotted in as a May 2023 release, so it took many by surprise that just 1 month before that, Rocksteady decided to pump the brakes and announce another massive delay, this time to February 2nd, 2024. Just going by the dozens of other examples we've seen in the past, this was, in all likelihood, a delay designed to fix massive amounts of bugs and technical issues that the team just weren't able to crack in time, because despite the many complaints fans lobbied at the state of play reveal, nothing about Kill the Justice League's in-game economy or gameplay style would wind up changing. The official reason for this next mammoth delay was pretty much the same one they said last time. We have made the tough but necessary decision to take the time needed to work on getting the game to be the best quality experience for players. Thank you for our amazing community for the continued support, patience, and understanding. There is much more to share in the months ahead, and we look forward to seeing you in Metropolis next year. Now, some fans, the most sweet, innocent, and naive ones, mind you, took this delay as a good sign. Rocksteady had to know players were not happy about, well, a lot of stuff, so there was some hope that this delay was not only for polishing, but by taking consumer feedback into consideration and an extensive bout of retooling. But, as I outlined earlier, this just wasn't going to be the reality. There was no way, with WB at the helm at least, that Suicide Squad's entire in-game economy / scam was going to be redesigned, and there was even more no way that the gameplay or mechanics would change either, as it was just simply too late for that. Remember, the game was nearing 2 years behind schedule already, and honestly, in my opinion, the only reason it wasn't squirted out sooner at WB's insistence was probably Rocksteady's pedigree and pushback from its founders. While I've covered plenty of stories here on what happened where a publisher does take a step back, looks at a near completed project and says, this isn't working. Let's just cut our losses before we lose even more money and cancel the whole damn thing. Now, while WB Discovery's movie division seems to be all about that shitty life, it's slightly different for video games. Nowadays, years upon years of more work, and in many cases, way more money gets poured into AAA gaming over, say, a movie, depending on its scope, but the ceiling for profits can sometimes be even higher. Also, you'll notice that most of the near-finished games I've covered before were from earlier generations, where budgets were significantly smaller than they are today. So, in summary, I guess, by this point, after so many false starts and canceled pitches by multiple studios dating back to 2010, shifting over to their premier developer in full production for at least 5 years and promoted for 2 of them, there was no way WB was going to cancel or delay Suicide Squad any longer. The hype machine had to start spinning, but it was going to be, and stay, a very uphill battle. Quite frankly, the press did not sugarcoat this situation, as online previews of Suicide Squad from an event in January 2024, just a few weeks away from launch, were largely negative, as many outlets cited uncertainty about pretty much everything. Journalists and reviewers took issue with the now familiar grindy nature of of the gameplay, the messy UI, the technical performance, just, previews tend to be pretty optimistic at the very least, but this time no one was pulling their punches. And it has to be said that while a good portion of this negativity was due to the game itself, burnout from this particular subgenre must have been a factor too, as fans and journalists have experienced this same type of gameplay loop pretty regularly for the last few years, including, superhero-based ones. And with all of the big, hot, hardcore gaming season titles I've covered here on What Happened, I've never seen the usually glowing early previews be less than glowing. At least CD Projekt Red had the foresight to only allow coverage of the PC version of Cyberpunk, and Rockstar allowed no previews at all of the GTA Definitive Collection shit show. So really, the numbers did not lie, and they spelled disaster for Rocksteady and Warner Brothers at sacred release day. And so, a disaster it indeed was. Suicide Squad's launch was plagued with a litany of problems, bugs, and backlash. As a part of the deluxe edition, players were given 72 hours of early access to the game, but because of a bizarre issue that marked players' progress as 100% complete before even booting it up, servers had to be taken down for maintenance to fix the boo-boo. And since it's an online-only game, no one was able to play it during that downtime, which, as you can imagine, made many gamers happy. Those affected were given a 2,000 Luther bucks, which equated to around $20 of real-world currencies. So, not off to a good start. Of course, the game's online connectivity in general was also a big problem, as even weeks after launch, Rocksteady were still trying to crack down on issues that were causing players to desync or get booted from a session altogether. Subsequent patches actually made things worse for some players, as they weren't able to properly level their characters or gear, while others would run into the infamous loading Metropolis bug, which wouldn't let players progress at all. Because of all of this, the community for the game, even some of its staunchest and most brave defenders, started turning against it, citing immense dissatisfaction with all these bugs, the prospect of having to kill and not play as some of their favorite heroes, but of course the monetization model as well. It's bad enough when the fully priced game you paid for lacks basic functionality, but it's another thing when that fully priced game you paid for that's not working is also constantly trying to incentivize you to spend your money. It should be no surprise then that Kill the Justice League's aggregate review scores placed it lower than both Avengers and Gotham Knights, and as the issues and bad press began to pile up, its player count drastically went down. But to some publishers, critical reception can sometimes be a little less of an important factor when compared to commercial reception, and fortunately, in respect to Suicide Squad, that actually wasn't the case. It just barely made the top 10 of the best-selling games of February 2024 according to NPD numbers, being beaten out by the likes of 2023's Madden release, Tekken 8, FF7 Rebirth, and Helldivers 2. In slightly better but still worse news, Suicide Squad was the #1 game in the UK during the first few days of its launch, but fell to 3rd the next week and then 13th the week after that. While player counts are hard to track across all platforms, Steam numbers paint a pretty grim picture. When the game launched, it peaked at around 13,000 players, which then nosedived into 3 digits by the end of February. And as of the time of this writing, it regularly varies between 300 to 400 players. Now, okay, during all these trials and tribulations, something that certainly could have helped was strong, experienced leadership. Leadership who could rally the team, take decisive action, and work towards bettering the product in a timely manner. Unfortunately, that precise type of experience wasn't really available to Suicide Squad's developers during its launch, as the founders of Rocksteady, who had led on all their games up to that point, had left the studio, and had left the studio for a while. Jamie Jamie Walker and Sefton Hill, in a joint statement with Warner Brothers, explained that they were leaving after 18 years, with the reason being as vague as you'd expect. With Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League nearly finished, they have both decided to leave Rocksteady at the end of 2022 and will begin a new adventure in gaming. Now, it's typical that towards the end of a given project, some creative leads feel that their job is done, so they decide to seek new challenges elsewhere. The problem is, like he was on all of Rocksteady's Arkham games, Sefton Hill was Suicide Squad's creative director, and if you check your dates, his departure was not just 2 to 3 months before launch, but rather over a full year. Jamie Walker's departure wasn't insignificant either, because while he didn't work on most games directly in a creative sense, he was Rocksteady's studio director, so he was at the head of its daily operations. Now, obviously, when these two exits were planned and then announced, Suicide Squad was still on track for its early 2023 release, but then it got delayed the full year to 2024, and the studio was now without 2 of its key people. It's not exactly known what prompted the sudden exit, if there was any other factors aside from the official reason. And try to act surprised here, I wasn't able to contact either Mr. Walker or Mr. Hill in time for this video. Honestly, just like many elements to Suicide Squad's very messy development, there could be a multitude of reasons for their departure. Perhaps they did feel the game was in good hands and simply didn't think a big delay was forthcoming. Perhaps they were tired of working under the WB umbrella or were not supportive of the games as a service business model that was being pushed. Or perhaps they, as the figureheads and leaders of Rocksteady's work culture, were given a diplomatic way to quietly exit the studio. Regardless of the reason, both Hill and Walker announced earlier this year they were opening another London-based studio called 100 Star Games, and would be focusing on, yet again, the AAA gaming space. Meanwhile, Warner Brothers execs had their own announcement in regards to Suicide Squad, and it wasn't nearly as positive. IGN was the first to report that in an earnings call, WB Discovery's CFO simply said, "This year, Suicide Squad, one of our key video game releases in 2024, has fallen short of our expectations since its release earlier in the quarter, setting our games business up for a tough year-over-year comp in Q1. And things do seem like they're gonna remain tough, at least, for a while. Despite recently released Joker content, the Clown Prince of Crime doesn't seem to be moving the needle much at all, and at this point, many don't believe it ever will. While turnarounds aren't unheard of, cut to the only 2 examples we really have, it's difficult seeing Kill the Justice League somehow reverse its fortunes anytime soon, or ever, really. You can pinpoint a lot of these poor decisions on upper management in some way or another, and while hindsight is indeed 2020, it's nevertheless easy to see where the better paths were not taken. Letting WB Montreal continue their version of Suicide Squad and letting Rocksteady cook, allowing the single-player Damian Wayne game to continue, Gotham Knights being the IP to shift over to Rocksteady instead of Suicide Squad, or maybe not wasting everyone's time with another grindy live service title when there's more than enough to go around. But sadly, the most mystifying thing of all is WB's recent proclamation that not only were they going to continue live servicey games, they're going to double down on them. As reported by GameSpot, during a Morgan Stanley Billionaires Circle Jerk event, the head of WB Games, J.B. Perrette, said, "So rather than just launching a kind of one-on-one console game, how do we develop a game around, for example, Harry Potter that is a live service, where people can continue to live and work and build and play in that world on an ongoing basis. We have a roadmap and a strategic investment plan to try and build out that business, and we think there is meaningful growth over the course of the next couple of years. It's not just expanding the longevity in the life cycle so that you're not going from a release of a Batman title one year and then sort of if it goes dormant for 3 or 4 years. If we can execute on this strategy, it also allows that franchise to live on day to day, week to week, on a much more consistent basis. So you're nurturing that fan base. No, you're not! It was literally proved. You proved that you can't just bolt on this model to anything and everything and expect success. Like, this interview happened a full month after Suicide Squad bombed and years after the Avengers did. Like what the fuck is wrong with you? Statements like this, thinking like this, proves that some men just want to watch the world burn. Let's just hope Rocksteady somehow survives this debacle. But in the meantime, if you out there know of any other cursed comic book capers, let me know in the comments below, or enter whatever that the Suicide Squad hangs out in place. That is my social media. See you next time, and thanks for watching.